Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dorothy Stratten. Dorothy Ruth Stratten was born on February 28, 1960, in a neighborhood in Vancouver. Her parents were of Dutch descent and moved to Canada a year after she was born. The Stratten family later expanded with the birth of a son named John, and 7 years later, Dorothy had a younger sister named Louise. Her family lived a simple life. Dorothy was a good student. During her childhood, she did not dream of becoming famous or aspire to have a brilliant career. She only wanted to have the basic things that her poor family could not provide. In 1977, Dorothy started working at a fast food restaurant called Dairy Queen while she was still in high school. At that time, she was 17 years old, with blonde hair, a charming face, and a tall figure that attracted a lot of attention. Not only young boys but also older, wealthy men were drawn to her beauty. One evening before the diner closed, Paul Snider, a charming young man, walked into Dorothy's workplace. Paul was quickly attracted to the young and attractive Dorothy. After ordering and paying, Paul handed her a large bill. When Dorothy said she couldn't give him the change, Paul laughed and offered her the money on the condition that she go on a date with him immediately. Dorothy agreed. Paul Snider, 26, was a prominent figure in Vancouver. He managed and scouted models for clubs. He had many friends and connections across Canada. When Paul saw Dorothy, 17, with her blonde hair and charming smile, he immediately recognized her great potential. Paul asked Dorothy out on a date to a fancy restaurant and gave her a red evening gown. She later wore the dress to her high school prom. Paul and Dorothy began their relationship. Although Paul was 9 years older than she was, her parents did not object to their relationship. A few months into their relationship, Paul persuaded Dorothy to participate in a daring photo shoot. She was initially uncomfortable, but Paul convinced her that she had the potential to become a successful model and earn a considerable income. Dorothy eventually agreed to Paul's proposal. Paul found a studio and hired a professional photographer to take pictures of Dorothy. After completing the photo shoot, he sent the photos to the famous Playboy magazine. Dorothy's photos made a strong impression. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. However, Paul knew that Dorothy's parents would not approve of her working for such a provocative magazine. So he forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming that Dorothy's mother had given her permission to sign a contract with the magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy went to Hollywood. By August, Dorothy had become Playboy's Playmate of the Month and began working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. However, she felt pressured by the attention and was not used to her new role. She also found it unsettling that wealthy men were infatuated with her and spent time with her. Paul Snider was always by Dorothy's side, always willing to help her. He was in charge of taking care of every aspect of Dorothy's life, from organizing her schedule to signing contracts. However, she also felt completely controlled by Paul. To strengthen their relationship, Paul proposed marriage, and Dorothy finally agreed after some consideration. The reason she accepted the proposal was that she felt she owed him after all that Paul had done for her. In Dorothy's eyes, if it weren't for Paul, she might still be a waitress living off tips. She always felt that if she had never met him, her life would have been boring, working at the diner. However, Dorothy's family had doubts about this decision as they thought that Paul was using Dorothy for profit. Therefore, they warned her against marrying him. In 1979, the same year that Paul proposed, they held a minimalist wedding in Las Vegas. After the simple wedding in 1979, Paul and Dorothy continued to pursue their careers diligently. Dorothy also started filming, where she received recognition from directors not only for her beauty and charm but also for her real acting ability. As Dorothy's fame and fortune grew, she used her earnings to buy a spacious home in Los Angeles, where she lived with her husband. Paul Snider was pleased with his wife's accomplishments, boasting to friends that Dorothy's growing fame was a shared success. As Dorothy's manager, Paul was always present at her photo shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also closely monitored her diet, clothing choices, and alcohol consumption at social gatherings, occasionally giving her guidance on which influential people to associate with to advance her career. There was much speculation that Dorothy had an affair with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief of Playboy magazine. However, Hugh denied these claims, insisting that Dorothy was not a woman of loose morals. Over time, Dorothy began to realize that her husband Paul was controlling her life too much. Dorothy appointed a new professional manager and began to exclude her husband from photo shoots, inventing various excuses. The distance between the couple grew, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He became jealously protective of his wife, even hiring a private investigator to monitor her actions. However, no evidence of guilt was ever produced. Paul began to impose restrictions on his wife's clothing, not allowing her to wear provocative clothes and preventing men who did not benefit the family financially from admiring her. He incited conflicts and, in moments of anger, even resorted to physical violence. Dorothy found herself unable to tolerate her husband's aggressive outbursts and increasingly sought to distance herself from him. Friends and colleagues observed growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Playboy staff frequently advised her to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul lived in their home, using his wife's earnings and indulging in idleness. One day, he discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. The move, advised by her manager, was strategically arranged so that, in the event of a divorce, Paul Snider would have no claim to the money. Paul's behavior escalated into more scandal as he sought his influence over his wife diminish. As Dorothy rarely returned home, Paul began to realize that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away from him. In the spring of 1980, at a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met 40-year-old film director Peter Bogdanovich, a close associate of Hugh Hefner. Peter was charmed by Dorothy and invited her to star in his upcoming comedy. Everyone laughed, and Dorothy accepted the offer to play a mistress. On March 22, Dorothy set off alone to New York to shoot the comedy. She lied to Paul, telling him that the director had forbidden anyone other than the cast and crew from being on the set. In fact, she feared that Paul might cause a disturbance during filming. Furthermore, Dorothy asked her manager to filter calls from her domineering husband while she was on set. In New York, Dorothy found herself infatuated with Peter, and a passionate affair blossomed between the actress and the director. Dorothy exuded joy at being with the new person in her life, not wanting to miss out on the opportunity with a sophisticated, wealthy, and influential director. Her attitude towards her husband became distant and cold. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York, and during this time, Paul was left alone in their large home in Los Angeles. Sometimes Paul brought other women home, who were shocked to discover that Paul was being unfaithful to such a gorgeous wife who was also a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California to attend the Playboy Awards. She won the prestigious title of Model of the Year and appeared on the cover of the magazine, winning a new award. As part of the recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car, and a cash prize of $200,000. She developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the editor-in-chief, who had high hopes for her. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. During the weekend, Dorothy attended a party with director Peter. Meanwhile, she was planning to spend the final part of the tour with her family in Vancouver. However, Paul found out about these plans and immediately traveled to Vancouver, where he had experience managing clubs and numerous connections. During Dorothy's brief break, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and kept all the profits. This period led to a significant conflict between the couple. Dorothy was in tears, contemplating giving up her career to salvage the marriage. She expressed a desire to return to her parents' house with Paul and start a new life. Paul dismissed this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York to continue filming while avoiding her husband. At one point, she phoned Paul and requested some space in their relationship. Paul became depressed and angry with Dorothy. At the time, he was having an affair with a girl under the age of 18. The girl looked like a model, and Paul wanted to transform her into the next Playboy bunny. However, he soon realized that his young lover could never surpass his wife. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul received a heart-wrenching letter from Dorothy in which she expressed her desire for a divorce and her intention to stop supporting him financially. This convinced Paul that his fears of Dorothy's infidelity were justified, especially as he suspected she was involved with director Peter Bogdanovich. To gather evidence of his wife's infidelity, Paul hired a private investigator. On one occasion, he called Dorothy's manager and threatened to cause trouble or even do something more serious. The manager advised Dorothy to hire bodyguards and be cautious around Paul. However, Dorothy ignored this advice. Without a green card and lacking permanent residence in the United States, Paul struggled with employment and finances. Facing the risk of running out of money, he withdrew all the funds from his and Dorothy's joint bank account. Consequently, he also sold Dorothy's valuable assets, including collectibles, jewelry, and the Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her, all at low prices and only for cash. Furthermore, he began renting out rooms in their large house to friends, partly due to depression and loneliness. Gradually, Paul began contemplating a return to his native Canada. In mid-July, filming for the movie in which Dorothy was starring was completed. After that, Dorothy and director Peter Bogdanovich went on a 10-day vacation to England. Upon returning to Los Angeles on July 30th, Dorothy decided to move into the director's mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Bel Air. Meanwhile, Dorothy's ex-husband Paul was plotting his revenge. On the afternoon of July 31st, he borrowed a gun and went to Peter Bogdanovich's house at night. He hid near the gates of the mansion, determined to shoot anyone who came near. After hours of fruitless waiting, Paul became desperate and drove to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles. During his time alone there, he was plagued by painful thoughts of suicide. When he returned home late at night, Paul still harbored hopes of reconciling with Dorothy. A week later, on August 8th, he convinced Dorothy to meet him at his house. However, Dorothy had changed significantly since their separation. She had become a confident woman with a newfound charm and was no longer affected by Paul's words. Dorothy told Paul that she was in love with another man and wanted a divorce. Paul remained calm and asked her to come back in a week to discuss the breakup amicably. However, the next day, Paul attempted to purchase a gun. He visited several stores but was unable to buy one because he was a Canadian citizen. Paul asks his private investigator to purchase a rifle for self-defense and home security reasons, but the private investigator advises against it and refuses to assist. On August 11th, Paul finds an ad in the newspaper for an old 12-gauge shotgun for sale. He decides to go to the San Fernando Valley to check it out and possibly purchase the shotgun. However, he gets lost and cannot find the address, so he returns without the shotgun. 2 days later, on August 13th, Paul returns to the same location and finds the seller. He purchases the old shotgun and tells the seller that he will use it for hunting. On August 14th, Paul asks his roommate to leave the house so he can talk to his wife, Dorothy, in private without interruption. Dorothy's managers and assistants advised her to accompany them to the meeting or to resolve the issues over the phone. However, Dorothy decided to go alone. She brought a large sum of money to express her gratitude to Paul for his past help. She hoped that the meeting would be peaceful and that she could maintain a friendly relationship with Paul. Dorothy planned to have a short meeting with Paul, so she scheduled a photo shoot for that evening. At noon on August 14th, Dorothy went to meet Paul at his home. Upon arrival, Dorothy received a safety check call from her manager. They had previously set up a specific code for her to use if she encountered any problems. After assuring the manager that everything was fine, the call ended. However, the conversation between Dorothy and Paul gradually became tense and escalated into a dispute. In a sudden fit of rage, Paul pulled out a gun and shot Dorothy in the face. After causing Dorothy's death, Paul seemed to lose control of himself and behaved strangely. He eventually took his own life. At 8 p.m., Dorothy's roommates returned home and found her car parked in front of the house. When they entered the house, they saw Dorothy's handbag in the living room and thought that Paul and Dorothy had made up. They assumed the couple was in the bedroom, so they decided to retreat to their own room and keep quiet. Dorothy's managers became increasingly worried when they could not reach her by phone. They finally managed to contact Paul and Dorothy's roommate at 11 p.m. After a brief conversation, the roommates decided to check out the situation in the master bedroom. When they entered, they witnessed a horrifying sight. Both Dorothy and Paul had died. According to the autopsy, Dorothy Stratten, 20, died about an hour after she arrived home. Dorothy's husband, Paul, died about an hour after his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was one of the first people to be informed of the tragic event. He called his friend Peter Bogdanovich and broke the news of Dorothy's death. When Peter heard that Dorothy had died, he was so shocked that he fainted. He then spent a long time on sedatives to overcome his pain and grief. As a result, Playboy magazine was sent out for publication before the editors knew about it, so the August cover was not changed. Consequently, the magazine was published with a picture of Dorothy Stratten, who had tragically passed away. However, for the annual Playboy issue, her image was replaced with that of another model. Peter Bogdanovich was responsible for organizing and financing Dorothy Stratten's funeral. The loss of his lover had a profound impact on him. He decided to cremate her remains, which were then buried in a Los Angeles cemetery. After the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed, the comedy in which Dorothy had starred. Determined to promote the work, Peter bought the film rights with his own money. The comedy, They All Laughed, was finally released in 1981. Despite his efforts, the film did not receive significant praise and failed to attract much audience attention. This commercial failure cost Peter millions of dollars and eventually led to his bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratten's death, rumors surfaced that director Peter Bogdanovich had secretly met with Dorothy's younger sister, Louise Stratten, who was then 13 years old. The Stratten family strongly denied these claims and took legal action against the spread of these rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, Peter, then 49, actually married Louise Stratten, who was then 20. Louise later stated in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratten were married for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried, devoting his life to filmmaking. He died in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratten, who now resides in her hometown of Vancouver, pursued a career as an actress and film director.